My name is Caleb Ross, I'm 35 years old, and I live in Bend, Oregon, where I work remotely as an environmental consultant for companies needing to meet ecological compliance standards. The kind of job most people don't really understand, and that to some just sounds like unemployed with Wi-Fi. At least that's how I've felt the countless times I've visited my wife Grace's parents' house. The first time I met the Coopers, I could already feel the chill in Mr. Douglas Cooper's handshake, the kind of man who measures another's worth by how big his year-end bonus is. He spent 30 years as a top executive at a multinational in Seattle, retired early, and now lives as a full-time investor, as he likes to say. As for Mrs. Janet Cooper, she pretends to be sweet, but she has this way of watching you like she's just waiting for the right moment to stab you in the back. Too polite, too friendly, and always passive-aggressive. They live in one of those picture-perfect homes in Lake Oswego, with a surgically trimmed garden and rugs that look like no one's ever stepped on them. I didn't grow up in that kind of world. I'm from rural Georgia, raised by a single mom who taught me the value of honesty and hard work. I earned a scholarship to study biology, spent years working in national parks, and now run my own eco-consulting business. But none of that seems to matter to the Coopers. To them, my job is too uncertain, and my style too unconventional. I don't wear suits or fancy watches, and apparently that disqualifies me from being their daughter's husband. At our Sunday visits, Grace would try to bridge the gap. She'd squeeze my hand under the table, give me silent smiles, but I could see in her eyes how tired she was from trying to balance two worlds, ours and theirs. Everything unraveled on Douglas's birthday. We had just gotten back from a short trip to the Oregon coast. I was exhausted after spending 3 days cataloging species in a reforestation zone near Florence. But Grace insisted, "It's just for a few hours. It's my dad's dinner." I got dressed, swallowed my exhaustion, and off we went. When we arrived, Janet greeted us with this unsettling enthusiasm. "Caleb, darling, I made something special for you tonight, a signature cocktail. Thought you might like it." She had never called me darling, and she had definitely never done anything with me in mind. In the kitchen, alone with me for a few seconds, she handed me a glass with a reddish drink, garnished with an orange slice and a mint leaf. "How special," she said. But when she turned to grab the hors d'oeuvres, I saw what she didn't think I'd catch. A small capsule dropped into the drink before she gave it a gentle stir with a spoon. My stomach turned to ice. On the counter, there was another glass, identical to mine, still untouched, and I made a decision. With a quick, natural gesture, I swapped the glasses. I brought both into the living room, handed the one that had been prepared for me to Mr. Douglas, and said with a smile, "Mrs. Cooper made this drink with me in mind, but I think it suits the birthday boy better." He raised the glass, gave a dry toast, and downed it in just a few gulps. 40 minutes later, he was pale as a ghost. He started sweating, breathing heavily, and suddenly stood up. "I need a minute," he muttered before rushing to the bathroom. The sound of vomiting was clearly audible from the dining room. Grace ran after her father. Janet froze. Her eyes met mine, and in that instant, everything became crystal clear. She knew that I knew. I didn't say a word. I didn't confront her. I just sat down, picked up my glass of water, and silently ate dessert as chaos unfolded around the house. That night, I didn't sleep. I pretended to be wiped out from field work and went straight to my office the next morning. But I already knew I couldn't keep pretending. That woman had tried to drug me, and it wasn't about the drink itself. It was about what she wanted to trigger, to make me look fragile, disoriented, maybe even ridiculous in front of Grace. She wanted to plant the seed of doubt, to dismantle my place in Grace's life without anyone noticing. It was intentional. But now I had something she didn't expect: information, and a thirst for justice, not from anger, but from conviction. The morning after the dinner, I reached out to Ashley, an old college friend who now works at a toxicology lab at the University of Portland. I carefully explained that I needed to test a substance from a drink. "Someone you trust tried to sabotage you?" she asked. I simply replied, "I'm still trying to figure that out." She asked for the glass and promised to keep it discreet. 3 days later, she called me. "Caleb, This had clear traces of zolpidem, a controlled sedative. In the wrong dose, it can cause memory loss, disorientation, even loss of consciousness. The world stopped for a second. I had known, but now I could prove it. I didn't tell Grace right away, partly because I didn't want to hurt her. She still believed, despite everything, that her parents meant well, but also because I needed more, one piece at a time. I started investigating quietly. I found out that Janet had 2 different medical prescriptions in 2 different states. One of the doctors was legitimate, the other had the most suspicious record I'd ever seen. I used a mutual contact at a pharmacy in Beaverton and discovered Janet had been filling duplicate prescriptions for years, using slightly different names on the scripts. At the same time, I started noticing a deeper pattern of manipulation than I had imagined. I began talking to people in the Coopers neighborhood, quietly. The florist mentioned an odd incident a few months back, where Janet accused a delivery guy of stealing, with no proof at all. The longtime gardener stopped working there and confided that Janet fired him after he said he thought Grace was strong for following her own path. Everything began to fall into place. It wasn't just about me. It was about control. A few days later, Grace mentioned, surprised, "My mom wants to update her social media profile and asked if you could take the pictures. She said she wants something more professional." I agreed immediately. It was exactly what I needed, a reason to get back into their house with my camera. And something else. On the scheduled Saturday, I showed up alone, with my gear and an envelope. Janet was dressed up, fully made up like she was about to be featured on the cover of a magazine. "Douglas is at the golf club," she said casually. Before we began, I took the envelope from my backpack and placed it on the table. She stopped smiling instantly. "What is this?" "The lab results from the drink and copies of your 2 medical records." I spoke calmly. No need to raise my voice. She turned pale. "This is ridiculous. You're making things up. You know I'm not. And now I know too." I stepped closer. "You tried to humiliate me in front of your daughter. You wanted me to seem unstable, irresponsible, all because I don't fit the mold of your world." Janet kept her icy tone. "You're not stable. You work from home on projects nobody understands. You're not man enough for my daughter. She could have married Mark, remember? A lawyer, traditional, from a good family." That mention of her ex caught me off guard. Grace rarely talked about Mark. "You think drugging someone is the solution? That manipulating your daughter's life is love?" "I wasn't going to hurt you," she shot back. "I just wanted you to miss that meeting with the investors. It would have shown Grace that you're not reliable." And there it was, the naked truth. She had wanted to sabotage my career, my image, my place. I took a deep breath. "You're going to tell Douglas everything. You'll apologize. And from now on, you'll treat me with respect. Not because you've changed your mind, but because you know you can't manipulate me anymore." She laughed, but it was a hollow, brittle laugh. "You really think Grace will believe you over us? She's our daughter, Caleb. She always will be. You want to bet on that? I've got more than just this envelope. I have the lab results, the preserved glass, the pharmacy records, and now, the motive. And if I have to, I'll take this as far as it needs to go. Do you really want to risk losing your daughter for good?" Janet didn't respond. She just stood there, frozen. I left the envelope on the table and walked out without taking a single photo. I knew she'd try to flip the story, and she did. She called Grace in tears, claiming I had threatened her. But this time, I didn't stay silent. I gathered everything: the toxicology report, the prescription records, copies of her passive-aggressive messages Grace had never seen. When Grace read through it all, her hands trembled. "My mom would never do this," she kept saying, but her eyes said something else. The following week, Grace went to her parents' house alone. She came back quiet. When I asked what happened, she just murmured, "My dad thinks you're overreacting, that I'm being manipulated." And just like that, Janet and Douglas did what they always do, played the victims and flipped the script. Now, I was the villain, the ungrateful one, the manipulator. The seed of doubt had been planted. But the game wasn't over yet. 2 weeks later, a plain brown envelope with no return address showed up in my mailbox. Inside, a USB drive and a short note. "You need to see this. C. Not knowing what to expect, I plugged it into my laptop. There were several video files, all time-stamped, each watermarked with the logo of a home security company. The footage was from the Coopers' dining room and kitchen, probably cameras installed under the guise of security, but now they were telling the real story. I watched in absolute silence. The footage from the night of the dinner showed exactly what I remembered. Janet picking up the capsule, stirring it into the drink, then turning around as she heard my footsteps. But that wasn't all. After Grace and I had left, a new recording with crystal-clear audio captured Janet yelling at Douglas, "Caleb was supposed to drink that, you idiot!" And Douglas, "This isn't the first time, Janet. I told you this was going to blow up in our faces." I couldn't breathe. Another video, recorded 2 days later, showed the couple arguing again, this time about Grace and me. Douglas said, "If he finds out more, he'll bring everything down. We need to make it look like he's the problem." And Janet, cold as ice, "I've already started talking to Grace. I'm planting the right doubts. Soon she'll think everything's falling apart because of him. And she'll leave." That hit like a gut punch. It wasn't just sabotage. It was a plan. In the days that followed, I dug into the origin of the note and the USB. I found out that Claudine, the Coopers' housekeeper of over 8 years, had installed the security system at their request, but had kept copies of the cloud access for herself. When she learned what Janet had tried to do to me, and having been through similar situations herself, even receiving threats from Douglas years earlier, she decided to act. I went to see her. She greeted me with a grave, steady look. I've seen what that family does to anyone who challenges their rules. I watched Grace fade little by little. You're the first who didn't bow your head, and honestly, I hope you don't stop. That's when I decided it was time to show Grace everything. But not just her. I invited Grace, Claudine, and the family's closest friends over for dinner at our home. I planned it carefully, without raising suspicion. Midway through dinner, I turned on the projector and said, "I need you all to watch this, and please don't interrupt." For an hour, we played the videos, presented the evidence, the documents. Grace sat still, frozen. The silence after the recording ended was like a hole had opened in the floor. Grace looked at me, eyes full of tears. "They planned it all, didn't they? To isolate me, make me doubt you, destroy you." I nodded. "And you weren't the first." She walked out of the room, went into the bedroom, and stayed there for hours. She didn't say a word that night. The next day, she came to me with the steady gaze of someone who had been reborn. "I want you to come with me. We're going to talk to them, and it's going to be the last time they get a chance to lie." We went to the Coopers' house together. Douglas opened the door with his usual fake enthusiasm. Janet followed right behind, already in full, offended mother mode. "Sweetheart, are you okay? Is Caleb dragging you into all this?" Grace cut her off. "Enough. We know everything. We have everything. And now we're going to talk like adults. On camera." I set up my tripod. I recorded the entire conversation, every denial from Douglas, every hollow excuse from Janet. And at the end, I played the recordings again, right in front of them. Douglas fell silent. Janet broke down in tears, but not from remorse, from defeat. Grace stood tall. "You are going to stay out of our lives. If you ever want to be part of our family again, if you want to meet your grandchildren one day, you're going to respect our boundaries. No manipulation, no emotional blackmail, and above all, no control." That night, Grace and I went home in silence. But it was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of doubt, the silence of liberation. And if you've made it this far, let me ask you something. Sincerely, have you ever had to step away from your own family just to find peace? Then drop a comment. And subscribe. This channel is for those who are done pretending everything's okay. In the months that followed, the atmosphere around the Coopers shifted drastically. For the first time, they weren't the ones calling the shots. Grace cut off all contact for a while. Janet sent messages trying to reel her back in. "We're a family, sweetheart. We need to talk calmly." Douglas, on the other hand, stayed silent, maybe out of pride, maybe out of fear of exposing himself further. I kept working, more focused than ever. Grace went back to therapy, reclaiming parts of herself that had been buried for years, dreams, memories, decisions that had never truly been hers. And in that process, she discovered something. She was 6 weeks pregnant. When she told me, holding the test in trembling hands with an uncertain smile, everything inside me went still. I knew keeping those two at a distance would be hard, but now we had an even stronger reason to stand firm. "Our child will grow up free," she said. And right then, I promised her I'd do everything to make sure of it. We sent a formal letter to the Coopers announcing the pregnancy. There was no immediate response. But 2 weeks later, we received an envelope from Douglas's law firm. Inside was the deed to the house we'd been renting, now in our names, and a document establishing a college savings fund for the baby. No letter, no apology, just the gesture. To most, it might have looked like generosity, but Grace and I knew better. It was silent surrender. They had finally understood. They had lost control. Time passed. Grace gave birth to a baby girl, Nora, with eyes that seemed to hold ancient knowing. The Coopers came to see her at the hospital. Janet cried. Douglas made an effort to be cordial, but neither of them offered advice, made suggestions, or tried to interfere. They stayed briefly, then they left, respecting the boundary we had drawn for the first time. In the months that followed, things stabilized. There was no reconciliation, just a truce. Grace allowed occasional visits, always under clearly defined conditions. Nothing was left vague anymore. There was no room for manipulation. One day, a package arrived in my name. Inside was a corporate catalog from Douglas's investment group. My photos were featured throughout, images he had purchased directly from my portfolio. No discounts, no edits to the photo credits. There was a post-it note with his sharp, unmistakable handwriting. "I hired the best, D." I didn't call, I didn't thank him, but I understood the message. He finally respected who I was. Not because I'd been shaped to fit their mold, but because I hadn't, and I had survived without giving in. At the opening of my photography gallery in downtown Bend, Grace stood beside me with Nora in her arms. My parents came up from the South to celebrate. Old friends filled the space, and by the end of the night, the Coopers showed up too. Quiet, but present. Janet studied the photos carefully. Douglas shook my hand firmly. For the first time, they didn't tell me what I should do. They just observed. On the way home, Grace asked me, "Do you think they've changed?" I thought for a few seconds. No. But they've realized we're not going to change either. Sometimes, winning isn't about destroying anything. It's about moving forward, without needing to explain yourself anymore. If this story touched you in any way, if you've faced family manipulation, judgment, or had to fight just to be yourself within your own home, subscribe to the channel. But do it for you. Here, we listen, we share, we support. This is a safe space for anyone who's tired of being silenced. And drop a comment. Have you been through something like this? What did you learn? How did you rebuild your emotional freedom? Your story might give someone else the courage to take that first step, because no one deserves to live in a prison disguised as a dining room. I'll see you in the next video, and this time, with the steady voice of someone who chose not to stay silent.